Good morning. Go ahead and get started. On behalf of Citizens Modern Transit, I would like to welcome you to the latest Talking Transit event focused on transit-oriented development keys to success, which will include important insights from Austin, Charlotte, Denver, Kansas City, and Minneapolis. Before we begin the discussion, please join me in welcoming the CMT board members who are online today, joining us for this conversation. Thank you for your support and continued commitment to transit. As you've probably heard, this year, CMT is celebrating 40 years of transit advocacy, and I would like to take a moment to thank our 40th year sponsors, including our gold sponsor, the St. Clair County Transit District, our silver sponsor, Bi-State Development, Siemens, HNTB, Greater St. Louis Inc., and our bronze sponsors, Ameren Missouri, Commerce Bank, Enterprise Holdings, BJC Healthcare, St. Louis Community College, and WSP. We would not be able to offer these events without their continued support. Thank you also to everyone else who has joined us for this important conversation on the keys to success for transit-oriented development. As the St. Louis region looks to expand its integrated public transit system through the proposed light rail extension project known as the St. Louis Metrolink Green Line, Citizens Modern Transit is raising awareness about the significance of transit-oriented development and pointing to case studies from other cities to underscore the opportunities it presents locally. I would now like to welcome Kim Sulla, our Executive Director, who will be moderating our panel this morning. Thank you again, and I hope to see you all at our upcoming annual meeting in September, if not before. Kim?
DeAndre. Welcome, everyone. We're excited to have this opportunity this morning to host this conversation about one more benefit of public transit, the opportunity for development. We have some experts on the call with us today, and I'm excited to welcome them and introduce them. Before, though, I just wanted to say we have some real opportunity in the Green Line corridor. We just hosted an on-the-ground tour yesterday, and there's lots of land opportunities as well as access to dense urban neighborhoods. And so that's why we have these experts on today. What tools do we need to have in place to make sure that development follows the investment in this significant public transit project? So our panel today features David Johnson. He's the senior project leader at TransPro, sorry, David, Consulting. He's the chair of the Kansas City Regional Transit Alliance, and he is a board member of the Missouri Public Transit Association. Welcome, David. We have John Lewis. He is a principal at TransPro Consulting, and he's also the former CEO of Charlotte Area Transit Service, CATS. We heard from CATS at our last Talking Transit on the impact of transit on the general public health. And so today we're going to hear a little bit more from John about the opportunities around development. And finally, we have Mark Gander, who is a director at Parsons. And Mark is going to touch on several more cities, Denver, Minneapolis, and Austin, on what tools they have put in place to ensure good development follows their transit system. So as DeAndre indicated, this region is having very serious conversations about the potential for expansion of Metrolink in the north side, south side corridor. While at the same time, we have a 5.2-mile extension under construction already right across the river in St. Clair County. That extension will open in early 2026. With that said, this conversation could not be more timely. We will definitely leave time at the end for all of you who are attending for questions and comments. Please feel free to add those in the chat box or the Q&A boxes, and I promise I will channel my inner Oprah and get to them as quickly as possible once we have our initial presentations from our three speakers. So we're going to start with a brief overview, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So let's jump right in right now with one of our MPTA board members, David Johnson, on the status of TOD in Kansas City. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Kim. Good morning, everyone. Happy to share the story of transit-oriented development in Kansas City. Unfortunately, it's a little bit of a short story because we got a late start compared to a lot of cities. Won't go into the long history of our failed attempts at light rail, but we did finally build bus rapid transit and modern streetcar and are in the process of expanding both. So that's really the basis of our story this morning. There are really three components to Kansas City's TOD story. The first is value capture, and we are sort of a really great example of the benefit of that scheme in building transit and building transit supportive uses around particularly fixed route transit. Proactive zoning, I'm going to really hammer on that this morning because you can have all the policies in the world, but if the zoning doesn't match the policy, you may not see actual results. And we have some firsthand experience with that. And then affordable housing. And I'm going to say that that conversation is relatively new in Kansas City. That's not to indicate that it wasn't important, but from a policy level and an elected leadership level, that's a relatively new conversation we're having, and it has permeated all of the conversation about TOD and major transit investments. So starting with value capture, another part of my involvement in transit in Kansas City is on the board of the Kansas City Streetcar Authority and currently serving as the treasurer of the Main Street Rail Transportation Development District that provides the local capital and 100% of the operating expense for the Kansas City streetcar system, which is separate and apart from the Kansas City Area Transportation Authority, which runs the region's bus service. So the Transportation Development District, which is essentially a special district, like a business improvement district or community improvement district, and the benefit is tied to special assessments and a retail sales tax that generate the income that support the streetcar system. The map on the screen, which is sometimes referred to as our Gumby, this was the original outline of the downtown Transportation Development District that supported the 2-mile starter line for the streetcar. And what makes this value capture, although the financials were really conservatively derived and didn't anticipate any growth, but any growth that did occur would be put back into the system almost exclusively and could not be diverted to other city uses. So it's really sort of in a lockbox, which has helped us grow the system, add more amenities as the value generated in the district improves with additional development and economic activity like retail sales.
David, I'm going to stop you for 1 second. Sorry, your
Sure.
slides are not advancing. So are you
Okay,
advancing
but it's
those
because
slides?
I need to hit the resume button. Let me just stop that again. I apologize.
Sorry,
It
I
was
don't mean to
stuck on.
interrupt, but you're referencing a map and people are like, there's no map. Perfect.
Fair.
Thank
Here we
you.
go. Hopefully we all see that. So here's the map. The Gumby reference should make more sense now that you have a visual. So yes, the three components or two components providing revenue for this district are special assessments. And what's notable about the special assessments is they are based on assessed value. So that's the other component of not only just the retail activity increasing and generating more sales tax revenue there, but also the assessed value of the parcels increasing as they're adjacent to the rail line, and thus generating more revenue as those values increase because the rates stay the same. In fact, they're at the maximum amount. And so that's really what's working well. It's generating more revenue for the system. And as I mentioned, it's going back into adding additional vehicles, which allows us to improve service. We're actually running more service than we've ever run today on the starter line, and that's anticipated to grow as the system grows to a full 7 miles with a short northern extension and a 3.5-mile southern extension that will open completely as a single route by 2026. Another component of the streetcar starter line and some other areas where transit is a key component of the urban environment is proactive zoning. And, you know, I could talk about Kansas City's transit-oriented development policy, but that policy really hasn't really been leveraged, in my opinion, because it does not have the force of zoning. In fact, it's been pretty much ignored in huge parts of the city. The local transit agency, KCATA, also has a TOD policy because it has started to incentivize development projects that comply with that policy. But that's still a pretty nascent effort and hasn't really, not much has opened. There are things in development. But this proactive zoning change were really, really transformational because it said to the development community, this is exactly what we want you to build along the streetcar line. And that actually ended up happening. And so I can't say enough that if you want real quality TOD, you have to put the zoning behind that in advance, again, to send that signal to the development community. So these new zoning codes not only allowed essentially unlimited height and density, but also eliminated parking minimums. And for those of you that follow the work of Donald Shoup and the parking reform movement in America, almost every city in America still has minimum parking requirements. St. Louis surely does, and huge swaths of Kansas City still do. But along the streetcar line, and only downtown, we have not actually changed this along the extensions, there are minimum parking requirements. And so what you're starting to see in cities is a reality that this is actually impeding business growth, small business growth in particular, and preventing small businesses from opening in urban areas, especially because they cannot meet the parking minimums. And the parking minimums do vary by type of use. And so the most intense usually being office. And so without those restrictions, basically the market can really function. And when given proactive zoning to tell developers what they really should be building, you may end up with really dense mixed use, which is what really TOD is all about. Zoning overlays are really sort of a duct tape version of that, where you do have actual zoning changes, but they're an overlay district that's really bound in by some special act of city government in this case. And Main Street, which is the corridor where streetcar is being extended south, Troost Avenue, which was one of our first bus rapid transit corridors, Independence Avenue, which is targeted for bus rapid transit, and Prospect Avenue, which is the most recent BRT corridor to open. And I'm proud to have been a project manager on that effort while I was working at KCATA. And that is the highest ridership corridor on the local bus system in Kansas City. And finally, affordable housing. As I mentioned, this is very much a recent, certainly a recent policy shift in Kansas City, although we have had affordable housing units for a long time, and Missouri's program is actually pretty decent compared to, say, Kansas. But the Housing Trust Fund is a new direct cash benefit for developments that meet affordable housing requirements from the city of Kansas City, Missouri. And that is actually delivering affordable housing units. Unfortunately, we missed an opportunity on the Main Street extension of the streetcar and really tying the affordable housing and housing trust fund benefits to transit corridors, which would make sure that there isn't any displacement or lessens the chance of displacement as a result of major capital investments like rail or more intense BRT. And then finally, the Central City Economic Development Sales Tax, which is a geographically bound benefit where the city provides direct economic incentives, really cash support for area that is defined by statute or by local ordinance, really the east side of Kansas City that has seen the most disinvestment from an economic and development perspective. And that's really, it's been controversial, really, the way it's taken a long time to see benefit, but I'm a firm believer in this. I voted for it. And I think with the right leadership and focus at City Hall, it can have a really big impact on some of our least most economically challenged parts of the city. And we are seeing that on a very small scale. And it's also encouraging small scale developers rather than a lot of large scale developers, which you might often see with incentives. And with that, that's our story of TOD in Kansas City.
You, David. So before we move on to John, quick question for you. Of all of the items that you mentioned, all the tools in the toolkit, which do you think has been the most impactful for the Kansas City area?
I will probably answer that in two ways. So one would be where we are today, and that would be the value capture district and proactive zoning of the streetcar starter line. Really, nothing has shown benefit as clearly and as large of a scale, $4 billion of economic development along a 2-mile starter line streetcar in a city that is not known for high density development or even TOD. So that's the clear winner, in my opinion, there. For the future, I think the combination of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and the Central City Economic Sales Tax will really have a major effect, especially if the city can nail the implementation and get projects really moving, because it is a very targeted and it's an area where there's been clear disinvestment. And that's also where a lot of the intense bus service is in the city. And so I think that combination is really powerful. We just need to see it through.
Right. Thank you, David.
You're
All
welcome.
right, so let's pivot and turn to John. John is with TransPro as well, and John is going to give us an update on the Charlotte story. What does that look like on TOD progress related to light rail expansion or transit in general in Charlotte? So welcome, John.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Kim, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. Let me start with the Charlotte story with a little bit of history about the development of the rail program in Charlotte. This conversation really began as a growth discussion in Charlotte in the late 1990s and early 2000s with the development of the city's comprehensive plan, which focused development and growth in the corridors, center city, corridors, and wedges. In the center city, obviously, there was a concentration of high density development, office space, mixed use development, and spattering of housing. Within the wedges areas of the development district, that's where you had the focus of single family housing. And the corridors that were established in that plan really laid out the major transportation corridors, both roadway, highway, and rail. That spurred the planning of the Blue Line, which was the first light rail line in Charlotte, which connected our outer beltway, I-485, through the southern portion of the city into the center city at Uptown and terminated at our downtown transit center. And so the original comprehensive plan helped to spur a good deal of development along that corridor. That corridor really, and in the early 2000s, were old tobacco and house and clothing warehouses and manufacturing, and those old warehouses turned into a great deal of housing, apartment housing, etc. But it really didn't. The mixed use development really didn't come into place and happening until the 2010 to 2020 area. What was interesting during this time was in 2007, just as the Charlotte was opening the first quarter of the Blue Line, there was a very well-funded and very vigorous campaign to eliminate the sales tax, which was funding this plan. That effort failed miserably. I believe the margin of that ballot initiative was 70% in opposition and 30% in favor. So transit really was baked into the DNA of Charlotte, just as the South Corridor of the Blue Line was opening in 2007. And so let's fast forward to 2018, when the Unified Development Ordinance, which is required by state regulation, really began conversations with the city on how they wanted to grow around this investment in rail infrastructure, both from a light rail standpoint and a streetcar. Our light rail line, as I mentioned, the South Corridor opened in 2007, 9 miles of rail from the southern end of the city into Uptown. In 2013, we began the development of the North Corridor, which connected Uptown to a major university in the North End, University of North Carolina at Charlotte. So a little over 18 miles of light rail. And there was a lot of conversation about what growth would look like, not only along that corridor, but within throughout the rest of the city. And the UDO really focused and was the connector between the comprehensive plan and really served as the largest regulatory tool for implementation of the city's comprehensive plan. Now, I will say, as a transit professional and executive, this is not a primer on the development ordinance or the zoning process in the city, but one area that I do want to focus on is the transit-oriented development districts that you see in the slide, which really pointed out the how development would be focused along our rail corridors and at rail stations. Next slide. And the UDO conversation began in 2015 and was implemented in 2022. So with the first area, the TOD Urban Center, you can see on this slide, this is the East Blue Line East-West station. This was one of the stations in the original South Corridor that opened. And the parcels for Transit Urban Center really focused on parcels near high-intensity rapid transit lines like light rail and streetcar. Then you will go, and a little later, we'll talk about the neighborhood centers, which focus on existing or future transit station areas, community centers, which have moderate intensity rapid transit like streetcars, and then transition zoning areas where moderate intensity transition from high intensity districts to adjacent neighborhood along the lines. And so in this slide, we're going to talk about the urban centers. As I mentioned, this station is the East-West station, which was one of the original stations opened in the South Corridor. And you'll see in and around this station, there's 17,000 plus workers, office workers, 4.5 million square feet of office space, which has more than doubled over the last decade. 800,000 square feet of office space are under construction or planned as we speak. And there are 4 rail stations serving that South End corridor. In this photo, you'll see the Lowe's Global Tech Center on the right. And I want to point this out because Lowe's, which is headquartered in the Charlotte region, their headquarters is in a suburban office park just north of the city. And as they continue to expand, they wanted to focus their new expansion in TOD areas where it could help with not only recruitment and retention of talent for them, but really provided a great opportunity for them to expand in and double down on their commitment to the Charlotte region. Immediately across the street on the left-hand side of the station is the 110 East Office Tower, which will be opening imminently. That's 370,000 square feet, 23 stories of Class A office space. And also on the ground level, which you can see, 12,000 square feet of retail space facing the rail line, oriented towards the East-West station. And we worked with, during my time at CATS, we worked with this developer to make sure that the retail space was seamlessly integrated into the rail station. We did not want the new development, and this developer was very open to the fact that it wanted to be a level platform from the development across to the station. And in both cases, the transit agencies worked with the employer to make use of transit to be as seamless as possible. So Lowe's has a transit pass program for their employees, and I expect that there will be similar programs for 110 East Office Center. I will say that when you're looking at both buildings, parking is still a nemesis, and we haven't been able to really slay that dragon despite the really frequent and high-intensity transit offerings along this corridor. The first 5 floors of both of these developments are parking garages. And so while the location of those has been very helpful and has spurred additional development along the corridor, we're still working through the parking conversation in Charlotte. Next slide, please. And so I want to talk, this slide is focused around the second phase of our streetcar, the Gold Line, which connects east-west, while the light rail runs north-south 18 miles. The Gold Line is a little over 4 miles, which is an east-west connector, which for the first time is connecting the historic community of Elizabeth neighborhood through the uptown area, connecting the hospitals, the university in the uptown with the historic African-American community of West End. And you see at this portion, which is in our Plaza Midwood area, you'll see the type of neighborhood center development, community center developments, which focus around moderate intensity rapid transit that streetcar brings. You're not going to see 25, 30-story office buildings along the streetcar, but you are seeing a really intense infill development, a lot of housing in this area, 5, 6-story apartment buildings that are coming up along this corridor. Next slide, please. And TOD transition. This is the west end of the streetcar in the West End, historically African-American community. And the transition zoning area, as I mentioned earlier, really focuses on moderate intensity transition from high intensity transit stations. If you look to the right of this slide, we're about a quarter mile from the uptown area. And you would see in that vision of the city, very high tower, both housing and office space. But now we're getting into the neighborhood of the West End, and you'll see a different type of development, which is different than community centers where you have, 5, 6-story, 7-story housing developments. In the transit transition area, this is really the developments focusing on townhouse and a little bit more moderate intensity development. Now, we'll say that in this area, we're really starting to see the impact of gentrification. And we can go on and on about the results of particularly rail infrastructure and how that infrastructure changes communities. You can see that the tenor and flavor of the neighborhood is changing. There is on the left-hand side, looking down towards the station, you will see low-income housing that has been acquired by developers and being changed to high-end townhouse development. And so the issue of gentrification still seems to haunt this corridor, but the development that has been really targeted in the TOD districts is live and happening as we speak. Next slide, we'll see also a little bit 2 blocks off of the Wesley Heights station, which was in the previous slide. Again, looking at moderate intensity transitioning from high intensity downtown areas into neighborhoods, additional townhouse and condo development, where 2 years ago, these were single family homes, which have been acquired, taken down, and really high-end townhouse development is being built. You can see on the slide to the right, this townhouse, which is listed in 800 to 1 million, right next to a very modest single family home. So still an issue that we are grappling with in Charlotte, but it is clear that the investment in rail, both from a high intensity standpoint and moderate and low intensity, is really starting to play out along those rail corridors. That concludes my presentation for this morning. Thank you once again, Kim, for the opportunity today.
Thank you, John. It looks like your face may have frozen, but the information you've provided is most excellent. We actually had comments in the chat box about people who have witnessed the growth in Charlotte, and it's not stopping anytime soon. So quick question for you, John. How is that impacting ridership on the system with the square footage of commercial, the new housing stock, the multifamily housing? What does the ridership story look like in Charlotte?
So I'm going to preface my answer to this with pre-pandemic ridership. So the North Corridor of the Blue Line extension, we opened in the spring of 2018. By 2020, we had greatly exceeded. Our 1 year and 2 year ridership figures. And we were creeping up close to our 10-year projections. That was moving so fast that we were considering speeding up our new rail car acquisition program, both from a replacement and a new car acquisition, to keep up with the ridership. In 2019 and early 2020, pre-pandemic, it was not unusual to have packed in light rail cars, particularly in the morning and afternoon commute. And for large events like football games and basketball games in Charlotte, you really had a high amount of ridership. Pandemic happened. The onset of virtual workplace has impacted ridership, not just in Charlotte as it has in transit systems nationwide, but we are seeing ridership continue to creep up. But the real important factor is that for major events in the uptown area, and Charlotte also hosts PGA golf tournament in our suburban area, when there are destinations and opportunities for non-transit riders, there has been no hesitancy to utilize rail transportation, the Blue Line specifically, as their preferred method of mobility. And so we're still dealing with the impact of the pandemic and the virtual workplace, but we're absolutely seeing ridership creeping back, particularly for, once again, those large events in our region.
Thank you, John. Isn't it amazing how a sporting event can drive ridership through the roof, and you say, hey, how about using it for work? And people look at you like, let me think about that. So yes, thank you very much, John, for those comments. So last, but certainly not least, let's turn it to Mark Gander, the director at Parsons, who's going to talk about TOD progress in Austin, Denver, and Minneapolis. As a reminder, after Mark's presentation, we're going to open this up for Q&A. So if you have questions, please place them in the chat box or in the Q&A, and we will get to them as quickly as possible. Thank you and welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Kim, and CMT and my esteemed colleagues that just preceded me with some great examples and stories about successes in their respective cities, and also recognize a few colleagues and friends that have been joining the call here. Let's get going here. I'm going to talk a little bit about 3 cities. The next slide. Looking at Denver, RTD, Metro, and Austin's Project Connect. And I'm going to kind of survey some of the LRT service within some of these areas just briefly, and look at the keys to TOD success that has been happening in each of these respective places, and then draw from them some lessons learned that are applicable to the Green Line extension in St. Louis, which has excellent bones, great momentum, fabulous building stock already, and there are a lot of corollary examples and lessons that you can import into your own experience and project development, project delivery process. So here we have the 3 cities I'm going to focus on, as I mentioned on the next slide. A little overview of Parsons, that we're integrated solutions. We're celebrating our 80th anniversary, which is a long time to be in the industry and to see the evolution of various modes of transportation. On to the 3 case studies. So we're going to look at from the oldest to the most underway, not yet built project. So, and Denver and Minneapolis are fairly similar in some ways, the ridership and the profiles of the service and systems. Actually, the first LRT line for Denver, RTD, opened in 1994. It was 5.3 miles. The first light rail line in Minneapolis, the Twin Cities, operated by Metro Transit, was the Hiawatha, now called the Blue Line, which opened in 2004, which was 12 miles. And now that's expanded through other networks. There's a plan to extend the Hiawatha Blue Line to the north. And there's also the Green Line, which connects to St. Louis, St. Paul rather, and Minneapolis. And the Southwest Corridor line is what we're working on now as Parsons in terms of the system as an electrification line. So there's a lot of great successes that Minneapolis has. In terms of Austin, another project that I worked on recently is that it's a starter line. They have anticipate construction to start in 2027 at a $7.1 billion just for the phase 1 effort. It'll be 9.8 miles and it'll open in anticipated opening will be in 2033. They have entered the FTA capital investment grant process. They have the NEPA underway and also concept design engineering, and they're moving forward. They have, of course, a great trust fund to help them propel forward. They had a property tax set aside levy that was enacted several years ago that provides a dedicated funding source to that system. In fact, all of these systems have in one way or another a dedicated funding source. Denver's in particular, its bonds will be retired in November of 2024. It started in 2004. The bonding capacity based on the 1% sales tax initiative that they started at that line that propelled a lot of the investments that they have and also some of the TOD activity. So let's drill down a little bit more into the Denver RTD experience. And I'm going to focus on just one particular example shown in the next slide, which is the Alameda Station area, which really developed in the early 1990s on a former Montgomery Ward distribution facility. And then when the RTD opened in 1995, the area underwent a massive redevelopment, and it was financed in part by the Denver Urban Renewal Authority. And then subsequently to that, they developed the station area plan in 2009, and the plan focused on the street grid system for better connections, general development plan for the area, and developed design criteria for future buildings and infrastructure. And then in 2010, in terms of the evolution of the TOD, the building blocks that they needed to make this a successful project, the RTD named the Alameda Station as one of 4 TOD pilot projects. And then fast forward to 2015, the Denizen developed, created many different project concepts and vision plans throughout the area, reutilizing some of the underutilized park and ride lots and really extending the street grid, creating more of a legible parcelization of some of the development paths throughout the area. And of course, all this development that happened at Alameda is also repeated on several other projects throughout the Denver area. And the tools that they use that they've implemented to make this successful, maybe there are seven tools in mind. They had a market study early on that they showed what the capacity is and the absorption for various types of market conditions to prosper in the area. They had a vision plan that was started early on, and that went through subsequent plan updates as the market changed and as the interest changed as well. They developed form-based codes throughout the area, and also TOD overlays as another tool that it was integrated with the comprehensive plan that they had underway. And then also all this was knit together by having developer engagement and interest. They had various RFIs, they had onboarding of development communities, they had walkthrough listening sessions, lots of developer development input from a range and different types of developer interests, including not-for-profit housing redevelopment agencies, and those that were sophisticated in using low-income housing tax credits and other incentives. Speaking of incentives, they have used tax increment financing, a form of value capture, TIF districts in the area to pay for some of the needed utilities and infrastructure that support the high density compact mixed use development that is needed within some of these, within the TODs, that has been very successful. And they dealt with the issue of parking, which in terms of how to right size parking, you don't want too much of it. Parking, of course, correlates in terms of affordable housing and how affordable housing can be provided. If you have too much parking, that detracts from the value of the housing in some cases, and you can better roll that into affordable units. With regard to parking, the state itself, interestingly, the state of Colorado passed a parking minimum requirement. So they have that on the books just recently. So they have a very updated and mature type of parking tools that they're using for many of the developments in the area. RTD owns many parking assets itself, and they have the ability to write down the value of the property in real estate transactions. In other words, they don't need to follow a fair market value appraisal of the property when they sell the property or have an easement on the property. They're allowed to strike a deal with the developer to earn the best value, to get the highest and best use, which in many cases is affordable housing. And all of this is infused with a very robust community engagement process throughout Denver that's in partnership with the RTD, with the local jurisdictions, with the regional jurisdictions, and with elected officials within those areas. So that's the Alameda example with some of the tools that the Denver region has put in place. Next, I want to then focus in on Minneapolis and the Twin Cities area, an area I used to live for many years and worked on the Hiawatha light rail corridor, the Blue Line extension, which celebrated its 20th anniversary actually just last week. And that is one of the first light rail line in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis that connects from downtown to the airport. And in 2001, we worked on a station area plan, TOD, that was sort of exemplary of some of the other TOD plans that were started early on before the Hiawatha line was even constructed. So this was prepared in 2001. So the light rail line was just beginning to be constructed at that time for 46th Street and Hiawatha, you show here. And you can see that the Hiawatha light rail line runs adjacent to a very busy Highway 55 corridor, which pedestrian safety was a key paramount concern there. You can see in one of the images to the left, the refuge, pedestrian refuge, and the kind of complicated gate crossings for the LRT that is at the intersection there. And in the background, you can see one of the shining examples of TOD at the 46th Street station platform stop area, which was captured in the early plan that was prepared in 2001. The key things about the successes of the Minneapolis experience is shown in some of the bullet points, that they've had lots of success. $6.4 billion in development. It was permitted along these high frequency transit corridors since 2009, and that's almost 40% of regional development. 11 billion near light rail transit stations, 8 billion near BRT stations in terms of permitted investments, 3 billion near some of the local bus stations. They've had a surge of 53,000 multifamily near transit, which represents 40% of the multifamily units in the entire Twin Cities region. And you can see some of the other statistics that are collated there below, that in the end, they've had tremendous success in the TOD program. So what underpins the success? How did they get there? So I drew upon some of my own experiences and lessons learned, and came up with these ingredients, as shown in the next slide. So they really had, like Denver had, an evolution of TOD that started from vision plans and station area plans that went on, and it's still continuing on, but started from the 2001 and 2010 period. They prepared corridor market studies and specific station area market studies, which are oh so important to understand what can really be built there. What is the highest and best use at the area? What can the market sustain? And then calibrate the zoning to fit the market realities of it. The city's 2040 comprehensive plan that was recently adopted made infill density even more likely to occur in future line expansions throughout the Twin Cities. There was frequent and dependable transit service that was integrated with bus transit and pedestrian bicycle infrastructure at the stations. There was just not a light rail line. It was all complementary multimodal investments and design that was thoughtful, that was considered at each station. There were development partnerships throughout the Twin Cities and adaptable zoning. And this equals an easiest possible way for developers to develop. Not always in the case, but most likely they really had an effort to create an ease of development. And as mentioned before, parking, which is a ubiquitous kind of requirement and issue for most TODs, they right-size some of the parking requirements. They've adopted quite a innovative set of policies and tools for affordable housing. They have a equitable TOD, ETOD policy was recently enacted. When affordable housing is built within the Twin Cities, within the RTD properties, certainly, and other public and private parcels, to be able to get incentives, the housing needs to be deed restricted housing. And that's a requirement that Federal Transit Administration asks on their forms when you apply for their capital investment grant funding. They don't want housing to be turned over so quickly. When the market rate changes, they would like affordable housing to be more permanent. And so they have deed restriction provisions within some of those policy measures. And they do a lot of collaboration with not-for-profit housing developers and the local redevelopment agencies, another key to achieving affordable housing within the area. And we already mentioned some of the usual tools that come into place, tax increment financing and other incentives packages. All these have come together within the Twin Cities to make it successful. Now we turn to Austin. Project Connect, which is a project area that's underway. As I mentioned, they have dedicated funding source that was approved in November of 2010. And Austin has realized that this is a once in a generation opportunity to capitalize on this major investment and set a bold community vision for the future. and framed by equitable TOD. So this case study, I'm really going to draw into the equitable TOD policies that they have underway. That was framed early on, something that I worked on for Project Connect when it was at Cap Metro, was looking at how you can frame each of the various TOD opportunities. There are some, and not one size fits all. There are some TODs that fit a central core or regional hub. There are some TOD villages, some TODs that fit within a neighborhood TOD, and some that are special destination TODs. Each of these have their own dynamics, their own policies, their own potential zoning adaptations that need to be done. And we created a typology of various TOD types and examined how they could flourish in these areas. So the next slide, I just briefly go into some of the keys to this was really partnership. And they enacted 6 goals that they helped propel forward the equitable TOD development policy plan that was just adopted in March. So let me wrap up here with just a few lessons learned and that frame kind of what I've been talking about and touches upon what some of my colleagues are on the next slide. Then next one, please. So the overall lessons learned that are very applicable can be imported directly into the St. Louis experience is to formulate a government's plan charter with agreements and stakeholders early on. Cultivate civic and community leadership. There needs to be a champion for the project, not just the light rail projects, but each of the TODs that are along the line. Make sure to be patient and recognize that timing is also important. In some cases, the market's not ready, and there needs to be a catalyst very often to create that spark at some of the TODs. A favorable regulatory environment is essential for development to invest. Also make available dedicated funding and other incentives, and understand the obstacles to TOD and develop a strategy actions to enable solutions. Look at how the process is going for TODs and to really create solutions that enable TODs to flourish. All this right now for St. Louis is timely because they need to integrate all this within the US DOT Federal Transit Administration Capital Investment Grant application that they have underway to get the federal money to then make the investment and build the system that St. Louis so desperately needs. Thank you very much, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mark, very much. Okay, let's jump right in. We did have one question already for David. So, David, did you already answer it? You did. So, David,
But I'm happy to talk more about it. Yeah.
Yeah, if you would like to touch on how Casey improved the use of the CCST and how they managed to get it passed, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, so that's the Central City Economic Development Sales Tax. There has been some frustration. I kind of alluded to it in my comments about how that program has been administered and whether it's actually had a meaningful impact. I think that the bones are there. If the city would put the right resources and make sure they're selecting good projects that can be actually executed. And I think that's been the challenge to date. But I think it would handily pass a renewal when the 10-year sunset comes up soon. It's 1/8 of a cent, and Kansas City loves sales taxes, as regressive as they are. That's what supports almost our entire transit system. And so I think it's going to be renewed, and hopefully they'll put the right people and structures in place at City Hall to make and find good projects.
Thank you. So this next question is to all of you. What has been the importance, and some of you touched on it a little bit, of community engagement related to TOD planning, investment, and implementation? How did that look in some of these case studies that we've talked about today? What does that look like?
maybe I'll just, I mean, in all the cases, in all projects, I think across the country, community engagement is a paramount activity that occurs from the grassroots to the, to the treetops. And it can look like in various forms. It can be, one-on-one conversations you have with community groups, with block leaders, with, getting out into the community and getting their input on what they would like to see. Holding open houses forums is very important. St. Louis has already had several open houses that talk about the expansion of the St. Louis line, and they should continue that, and drill down further to have more open houses and charrettes or workshops that do visioning around the station areas as the light rail line is being refined through the design efforts, because that can shape the design activity around the stations.
Right. Thank you, Mark. David and John, what have been the most effective strategies for engagement of key stakeholders in Kansas City and Charlotte, in your opinions?
So
Well, I mean, oh, go ahead, John. Sorry.
Sorry, David. I think from an engagement standpoint, and Mark touched on this, is really providing opportunities to meet with people where they are. And I think the one, positive benefit that has come out of the pandemic is the availability, understanding, and use of the virtual environment. Particularly, I remember in the early stages of the Blue Line extension, we did a lot of face-to-face conversations and town hall meetings, and those were helpful, but technology really made a huge difference in not only reaching people where they were and when, but the ability to record and allow people to access, participate in a virtual space when they are able to, and send questions, follow-up questions to the agency. So I think technology has made a huge difference. Hasn't solved everything, because we still saw despite all of our efforts on both the streetcar expansion and the light rail expansion, to try and include communities, particularly neighborhoods, on the design and participation early, there really still became a high intensity discussion once construction started, as if no one, people wait till the last second to ask questions on that. So there's still, there isn't a magic wand for that, but I think technology's made a big difference.
Great. Thank you, John. David, did you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I would absolutely echo and reinforce John's comments about digital engagement. It has completely changed the way we approach projects. Unfortunately, I'm still seeing consultants and organizations do the come to this place and meet me at this time, and that's really the only engagement they're doing. That's completely flawed, and there's no reason anybody shouldn't be doing digital as well, or digital first, to make sure they maximize their engagement. With the technologies like transcription and AI and real-time language translation, which helps you in ways that most people aren't even really realizing or scratching the surface of yet, that really, really broadens the field. And when you do go out with these changes, you have to talk about why. It's very, very important that you explain why you're doing something and lead with that message, rather than, hey, oh, look, we're making a zoning change for this project. Like that's not really why. You're trying to connect land use and transportation and make a better city. And that's okay to say. That's not a persuasive argument. That's literally why most people are doing these things. And you need to say that and lead with it.
Right. Thank you. So I know we're running short on time this morning. This has been a great conversation. I think we may have one more question. How can we apply the TOD Middle East, particularly in UAE and Dubai, where the hot weather conditions restrict walking during summer seasons? Also, what are the recommendations to implement the TOD strategies on the city comprehensive urban plans and policies? I don't know if anyone has an answer to any of those.
I can maybe just briefly take the first part because I am working now and advising our Middle East operation that we have in Dubai and other areas on exactly the expansion of the light rail and other transit. And it is Dubai, like Phoenix, Arizona, which has a successful light rail transit system and is very hot, frying pan in the summer. It's in a bowl, has implemented various things to make it more comfortable. Shading screens within the platform areas, and also these spritzer of water that, that come down while you're waiting, and even some fans that are enclosed within the in the area. So they've done every effort, and Phoenix has a successful light rail transit system. It is maybe an example for some of the landscaping that they've included in terms of shading and also the physical hardscape design within the station platforms themselves that incorporate shades.
Great, thank you, Mark. So before we close today, I always like to ask this question of our panelists, and I think this one will be really good for those who have attended this discussion this morning. What is the key takeaway from each of you for our audience about the key ingredients in your mind for successful transit-oriented development?
I would say engagement early on, not just with the community. From a mobility provider standpoint, we really wanted to be involved, not just in the infrastructure side with the construction of the rail lines, but also in the development conversation. I think it is very important for agencies to understand early on what the plans are for the properties surrounding their stations. As I mentioned earlier in the East-West example with the 110 development, that we were at the table, our transit planners were at the table very early on, along with the zoning conversation, so that we could bring our best practices to the discussion in the design of their development and how to make access as easy as possible. So I would say, don't allow from a provider standpoint, just don't take it for granted that good development is going to happen without you being at the table.
Great, thank you, John. Mark or David, the key ingredient?
Maybe just two that are, one is related, is really the governance and a charter that knits together all the stakeholders into an agreement to march forward is very important. That goes along with having a champion, not necessarily an elected official, but someone that can beat the drum, that is there to guide and provide vision, and people can identify as along with the community as shaping the project, the point of contact, so to speak, for the endeavor.
Thank you, Mark. David?
Zoning, zoning, zoning. I can't say it often enough. It's as you've mentioned, Mark mentioned in his comments, it's going to be required changes as part of the CIG application if you go that route. But just like make it clear to the development community that you're serious and that this is what you want. You can have all the policy documents you want, but unless it has the force of law, which zoning provides, and plenty of legal precedent to support that, you're not going to clear the path for much.
Right. Thank you very much to all of you today for your insight on what some key ingredients could be to start looking at in the St. Louis region as we begin to really weigh the the choices around our proposed green line and what that looks like for all those benefits outside of just that ride from point A to point B. So we really appreciate your expertise in joining us this morning. Thank you to DeAndre for giving us our opening and welcoming everyone, and Travis for setting this up. We really appreciate everyone joining us. We have some other upcoming events. Make sure you don't miss those. And we will have this presentation available on our website later on this afternoon if you have colleagues who would be interested in the conversation as well. So thank you very much to everyone, and make it a great day. Have a good one.
Thank you.